Welcome to In the Funnel. My name is Mark Cox. In the Funnel is a group of sales coaches and consultants that help B2B sales teams dramatically improve revenue. Clients come to us when revenue growth is stagnated, or their sales team is not meeting expectations, or they need to recalibrate their sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. Our clients have enjoyed tremendous success working within the funnel, and please hear it straight from them by listening to the testimonial section of this website. What they'll tell you is there's two things that make us unique and different in our space. Number one, we have a process and a methodology. First, for understanding your current state, and then second, for building your sales and go-to-market plan for the upcoming year. The second thing that makes us unique and different is that everybody within the funnel has run a material sales organization in their recent past. We're all practitioners. We don't have any theorists or teachers, and what that means is we can get in front of your sales team and run the next sales meeting, or join them on their next sales call to close your next large prospect. All of us have a passion for professional, disciplined, process-driven sales, and we'd be delighted to talk to you if you're looking to grow revenue for your company. Please feel free to reach out to us through this website at info@inthefunnel.com or by telephone. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.
I've really fallen in love with this idea I've had that salespeople think that they're differentiating when they talk about their product or good or service. Like that's the point of differentiation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it, if you look at some of the training that I've seen over the years, that is the point. Talk about how we're different. But you can differentiate yourself on your presence. You can differentiate yourself on connecting. You can differentiate yourself on the questions you ask. Yes. There's so many times other in the sales process where you can differentiate. So part of what I try to communicate and build capability on is you are the differentiation. Yes. Use the sales rep in terms of your behavior. Forget the product. Mm-hmm. Let's put that aside. Are you showing up differently than a competitor? Does your call look different? Does your approach look different? Does your ability to have a conversation look different? If it doesn't, then you're a commodity.
One of the great things about the Selling Well podcast team is it's not really scripted. So although we prepare for conversations, we don't really know where they're going to go. And we're trying, we're curious. So we're going to figure out where the conversation goes, and we go down some tangents. But the most important thing is as we're doing it, it's a candid, straight talk conversation. And that's why this conversation today you're going to enjoy so much, because today we're talking with JMReid. And John is the president of the JMReid Group, and they're a training and development organization that specializes in sales effectiveness, process improvement, and leadership. John's also written a really good book, and it's called Moving from Models to Mindsets, Rethinking the Sales Conversation. I really enjoyed John's book, which is why I reached out to him. It's a very well-written, short, concise, to the point book. And in it, John shares his view on the 6 most important core selling skills: connecting, presence, questioning, listening, asserting control, and then positioning. We do talk a lot about sales training, and we share how important it is to make sure that the learning isn't just coming from one place, which is the front of the room. It's actually coming from all the smart people in the room. He shares some thoughts around the issue of sales training, oftentimes being focused on beginners or low performers instead of actually for the medium to high performing team. He shares his thoughts on some of the more established training programs out there. That's where the candid conversation comes in. And overall, we just have a great chat here today. I really enjoyed the conversation with John. He's certainly got tons to offer in terms of experience in this realm. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the conversation as well. And if you do, please like and subscribe to the Selling Well podcast, because that really matters to us. Here's JMReid from Models to Mindsets. Hey, John, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. It's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you too.
How are things in Jersey today?
They're beautiful. It's a nice, beautiful February day, which you don't get too often, about 50 degrees and sunny. So it's a really, really special day here.
Actually, yeah, you don't hear that term very often in the Northeast. It's a beautiful day in February.
No, so we're lucky.
Yeah, we're awfully lucky. We're facing a bit of the same here in Toronto. It's nice. It's cold, but it's nice and sunny. And we've certainly gotten used to living in this world, that's for sure. Hey, John, one of the things that's kind of it, I was so keen to connect with you here today. First of all, big fan of the book, Moving from Models to Mindsets. And I'll throw out a little positive plug. The reason we came across each other, by the way, was I was asking kind of a common acquaintance, Andy Paul. I said, hey, Andy, whose books do you love outside of your own? And yours was one of the first he brought to the table. So that's what prompted me to take a deep dive, get the book, read, and reach out and beg you to join our podcast. So thanks so much for joining today. Tell me a little bit about your journey, John, in professional sales.
I started right out of college with Dow Chemical. What's interesting about that is I never had a chemistry course in my life. So I still don't know truly inorganic, organic. I think it has something to do with carbon. But I started at that time, Dow was hiring people who they believed had good personality, but and they would teach them the chemistry. So I started with them and was wildly successful. Right, Dow had a forced ranking system, and I ended up being one ranking out of four.
Wow,
top in the first rank, and so I had a great sales career, and I didn't appreciate it at that time because I thought this is easy. You just show up, you have conversations, you ask questions. You know, how difficult is it? What I didn't know at that time was that those people that had expertise, that had intelligence around it, were getting in their own way. Mm-hmm. They were either not being curious because they thought they should know. They were not being vulnerable because they thought that they would look less than. But people love to talk about what they do. And so if you say, hey, what does that tank over there do? The plant guy loves to talk about his tank. So let him talk about his tank. So so that was the early part of my sales career. And then I sold for other companies, went into marketing, went into strategy, the classic sort of career in that industry. I left all that behind to join the training and development industry with an eye on being more of a facilitator consultant. But they quickly said, you're not good enough. The first company, thank God they told me that, but they wanted me to sell. So I sold for them. And it was the second time around that I realized, I know something about selling that other people don't know. And I got to work for 4 different training organizations, 3 of which did sales training. And I got to see what is being taught versus what works versus what I know. And 13 years ago next week, I started my own company. So that's the journey.
It's a great journey. And, boy, you've been in front of so many, you've trained so many salespeople when you think of that career. And, in the book, you pull out the stat early on that says, hey, we spend about 20 billion on sales training every year. But according to CSO Insights, only about 9.6% of the respondents said the actual training exceeded expectations. What a shockingly low statistic. What's the problem, John? Why is sales training not meeting the mark of so many of the companies that are investing so much money in it?
I think there's probably 3 big reasons. Of course, the power of threes. I think there's probably
everything's 3, right? Yeah,
everything's 3. So the first one is the trap of intellectual property. That once you design something, whether you're, and I'll name names here, Korn Ferry or Richardson or Miller Hyman or you name them. Once you create something, you think the value is in the content. Mm-hmm. The action model basically says the value is in the content, and that the content is right and the content is good. You might even do research to prove that the content is good, but it's, of course, your own research.
Right.
If the content doesn't work, you say, well, they didn't buy enough, managers didn't embrace it, the culture wasn't right. And so the content focus is the first mistake. The second thing that gets in the way, because it shouldn't be content focused, it should be context. What the learner cares about, what buyers care about, what everybody cares about is this relevant? The first question isn't, I hope I have a great model today. Mm-hmm. It's, I hope this person understands my world and can help me.
Right.
right? But so the emphasis is all wrong. It's on content. And so that's the first place where I think it goes wrong. I also think it goes wrong because most of training is designed for low performers.
Okay.
It's insultingly designed in some ways.
Yeah.
It's prescriptive, it's step bound, it's do this, do that, it's fill this form out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not designed for middle and high performers.
Right.
And the training companies will admit this. I mean, they'll say, well, have the high performers come anyway, and they can be table coaches, or they can help the other ones. So it's not even designed for and where do you get the lift in your business? Middle and high performers. It should be designed for them.
Right.
Because that's where the money is. And low performers, probably training's not going to solve that problem.
Yeah, the Pareto principle comes into play with the 80-20 and so forth.
Exactly. And I think the third thing that happens often is, the person in front of the room has to respect there's wisdom in the room. Too many sales trainers, and I know a lot of them, a lot of them weren't successful as salespeople. They just weren't. So you have that issue. You have people who weren't successful teaching people, which is okay. I'm going to look past that. But they're also like the sage on the stage, like they're the font of wisdom. We're all there for the learner. And the learner should have the best lines. The learner should be the smart one. I don't know why the facilitator has to be the smart one. So the facilitator needs to enable. So I think those are probably three. There's more. The biggest problem is the intellectual property, though. Once you think you have the answer, you become a zealot. You go preach at people. You try to convert people. It's just not a way to change behavior.
Thank you, John, by the way. And it takes us down this interesting path about, you bring up the trainer has to be the smartest person in the room. And I think as soon as anybody walks into any room thinking they're the smartest person in a room, we're going to have a problem in the room. And whether that's in a training room or whether that's in your customers or client's office, whether that's in my house and my kitchen, if I'm walking in there, anytime I'm walking in anywhere, thankfully, I've never been the smartest person in any room. There's no room smart enough for that to take place or small enough for that to take place.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's lead to, with the folks out there today, one of the things I think that's a huge challenge in selling is there's just so much information out there now. When you and I were starting, we're probably not far from the same age. There really wasn't, hundreds of sales books or dozens and dozens of sales training companies. And there certainly wasn't social media platitudes, thousands and thousands every day. And I think for, salespeople starting, whether they're coming out of college, university, or other, I think today part of the challenge is they just get overwhelmed. And it goes
with a lot of nonsense, with a lot of stuff that's not helpful, a lot of stuff that's not going to make a difference for them.
I agree. I think if you were to follow LinkedIn, it would become evident to all of us that selling is the easiest thing in the world. There is one elevator platitude that can fix everything, and suddenly we're going to 10x our business.
Yeah, the three things you can say,
Exactly. And of course, here's the magic email. Yeah. Here's a fantastic LinkedIn reach out. By the way, we've turned LinkedIn into the world's biggest spam engine. Let's go. One of the things I really liked, in the book, John, first of all, I think it's very plain English. It's written so simply that I think it's a very easy book to digest, which is so important for making sure concepts resonate.
Thank you.
But you break down the 6 core selling skills, and you say it's connecting, presence, it's questioning, listening, asserting control, and then positioning. Let's talk, and I know this was 3-4 years ago for you, but when you probably wrote it 5 years ago, but let's talk a little bit about each and maybe come up with some tips for folks listening today, just on the connecting side of things. And you make an interesting reference in the book about building rapport. Tell us a little bit about what salespeople can do today to think about connecting, in a more significant way with their clients and prospects.
Yeah, I think the surprise for me, as I went through my own journey, and then as I started to design training and actually watch salespeople, I led a sales force, a Canadian sales force, by the way.
All right.
I know. So most salespeople believe they're good at building relationships. They just pride themselves in that. A lot of them say flat out they're relationship builders. But when push comes to shove, their own needs, urgency, time pressures, number pressures will crowd out rapport building.
Yeah.
So they'll miss rapport cues. The famous examples in the book, but we've been doing it for training for like 10 years now. Because I wanted to, with training, I'm always like, how do I get them to see it? Because people, they're doing good. They're not, if a client says, hey, I want to see my daughter's soccer game, not asking about the daughter's soccer game is not terrible, but it's not great, right? And great is asking. So that's what happens in workshop. We give them a scenario. Meeting's going to be cut 30 minutes short. Customer says they want to see their daughter's soccer game. What would you say next? And 19 out of 20, typically 18 out of 20 participants will not ask about the daughter. This is after they self-assess that they're really good at rapport building, which is beautiful. Right. They have sticky dots with green and they say, yeah, I'm really good at connecting. People like me. I like people. But we miss rapport cues. And sometimes we get healthy debates, which is great because people then get challenged, right? So learning, it's like, well, wait a second, I normally would ask. It's so fun because people will go, I normally would ask. And I'm like, no, you wouldn't. You didn't. You just didn't do it. And they're like, no, I would. And I say, why do I want you to believe you wouldn't? And I'm like, and they think about that. I said, no, why do I want you to believe you wouldn't ask? Because it's the only way you're going to change your behavior. If you believe you do it already, you're never going to change. I'm suggesting embrace the idea that you can improve. So our learning design is a lot like that. How do we get them to see it? And so I think connecting is a skill that, hey, we just miss rapport cues. People say personal stuff. It's not the magic answer. You could ask about the daughter's soccer game and the person could come back with, hey, I don't have time for that. But it's still, you ought to make that effort. And some people have been taught wrong about communication styles and personality. So they'll hear this and they go, oh, my client's dominant style or my client's a driving style. So they don't want to talk about their kids. And I'm like, well, that's nonsense. They're human. They bought it up. They said their daughter, it's like, oh, yeah. I don't know who taught you that driving style people aren't human, but they are. and so it's a rich topic to explore for people.
Well, I love the idea of, I love your question back to them is, why do I want you to revisit this? Like, why do you think it is I want you to revisit this? And it's a system 2 question where they go, exactly. Okay, now I have to think about this. And maybe it's going to resonate more. Now I'm more engaged if it's not just my intuitive answer.
Sure.
And yeah, so I think that's a really good way of trying to make these things resonate. We always use the example, John. For 10 years we've been doing recorded video training and recording things and role plays. And of course, you've done the same thing. And when you see after the role play, somebody says, "Well, it's the camera that's throwing me off." And the first 2 or 3 times, maybe that's true, but eventually you just revert to motor memory. These are things you're going to do on a sales call.
Sure.
And so I always like that. Oh, well, I would never do that. It's this room that's throwing me off. I would never do that. Number 2 was presence. Tell us a little bit about what you were thinking in terms of presence for salespeople.
I think presence is one of confidence, right? It's presence is a tricky one. It's like strategic thinking. Meaning it, it when you see it.
Yeah.
It can be that. There's some great research. This is not in the book. This is some research I just saw. But like 85% of us think we have presence, but only 15% are right. So basically, we're terrible at self-evaluating our own presence. I think the thing that salespeople do, particularly relationship salespeople, again, I'll focus on them. There's just a lot of weak words. There's a lot of, I know you're busy. I won't take up too much time.
Yeah.
Sorry, apologizing. Sorry, this will only take a minute. All these weak statements end up creating this relationship where the buyer, the person you're trying to sell to, feels that you are beneath them.
Yeah.
There's a great quote I heard: you get relegated to the person you sound like.
Oh, wow.
Think about that. As if you're calling a CEO and you're like, sorry, I know you're busy. Go talk to my admin. Go talk to somebody else.
Right.
So I think presence has a lot to do with word choice. There's the visual vocal stuff. There's how you show up in the virtual world. It's amazing how some people are unaware that they're on camera and you know, so they got to work on that. But that's table stake stuff. We spend a little time on that, but the bigger money is in the word choice that comes out of their mouth.
By the way, I just look like this. If you're referencing me in terms of the way I look on camera, there's nothing I can do about this face. So this is just how I look.
Okay.
Yeah. You know what, John, I think the other thing, just in terms of that presence and, the apologies and all this happens a lot with sales development, in my view. And I think at the core, they don't have an understanding of the value proposition to the business. So they don't really understand, the value that their company can provide that client or prospect. And so they have this lack of confidence. They think the client or prospect's doing them a real favor by even listening to them. And that's what you believe if you don't think there's any value you can bring to the table. And
yes, I don't know, and we can debate this, but it's, do they not understand it or they don't believe it? Because I go more that they don't believe it. They understand it. I get it. We do this, we do that, but I don't believe that that's of the same level of value that we think it is to the other person.
Yeah, this would be an interesting conversation for a later date and time, for sure. We could go deeply on that. Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both, and part of it comes to a lack of business acumen.
Yes.
So I think a lot of the salespeople don't truly understand what the buyer is going through on their side of the table with their business and their objectives and their pressures. And the less they know, the harder it is to connect the dots between perhaps what we do and what they're trying to achieve.
Sure, I agree with that. And I think, the time you spend on thinking about from the buyer's perspective, the more successful you're in negotiations, the more you're successful in talking about value. I would agree with that. I think, well, you're going to get to this, but I'll just cut to the chase. I really fallen in love with this idea I've had that salespeople think that they're differentiating when they talk about their product or good or service. That's the point of differentiation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it, if you look at some of the training that I've seen over the years, that is the point. Talk about how we're different. But you can differentiate yourself on your presence. You can differentiate yourself on connecting. You can differentiate yourself on the questions you ask. Yes. There's so many times other in the sales process where you can differentiate. So part of what I try to communicate and build capability on is you are the differentiation. Yes. Use the sales rep in terms of your behavior. Forget the product. Mm-hmm. Let's put that aside. Are you showing up differently than a competitor? Does your call look different? Does your approach look different? Does your ability to have a conversation look different? If it doesn't, then you're a commodity. Yeah. Then I can get rid of you and bring somebody else, and I can same thing. So I'm really fascinated now by the salesperson as a differentiator to create value, not just communicate value.
Wow, it's such a great point. And going back to the Harvard Business Review, July 2012, that HBR magazine, it was dedicated to professional sales, and they came up with that stat that I guess it was Charlie who had originally created the stat. I think it was actually used for the Challenger sale, but the stat was 39% of the time it's the skill of the salesperson versus price, quality, or service features. So 4 in 10 times the product does not matter. Given some minimum threshold of capability.
Sure. Yeah.
So, and I think recent stuff too, John, and you've probably seen much more of this than me, but recent stuff from Gartner says the buyers are not getting value, in many cases from the sellers. And again, I also believe that a lot of sales research is highly biased. So you really got to do a deep dive because
I agree.
My experience is a lot of, I've just come across hundreds, if not thousands of salespeople that are spectacular. But in the wide scope of things, my experience base is still N equals 1. When 1 in 10 people are in a professional sales job, I'm not seeing everybody, but there is this challenge we've always got to really add value in every interaction with a client or prospect. And I love that comment you've made about, the salesperson themselves can differentiate. Huge.
Sure.
Hey, listen, let's skip one and go to listening. That was one of the other core selling skills you brought up. Listening.
Listening. Wow. Can I think this is hysterical. I can't believe they got away with it. I think it's a crime against humanity almost. But if you read Challenger Selling, the Challenger Sale, which was the book, right, that we all got and read, and this is the answer to all life's questions, they do not talk about listening at all. If you go to the back of the index and look for the word listening, there's no listening. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you really look at Challenger Selling through a lens, you realize it's just a glorified show up and throw up. It's I'm going to go back. I'm going to create all this insight. I'm going to find out something you don't know because I'm smarter than you. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to bombard you with this. You're going to drown. They actually use that term. And then I'm going to rescue you. I mean, could any methodology that if a buyer really understood it would be offensive to the buyer, maybe we ought to stay away from. And any sales book that doesn't talk about listening, I'm telling you, stay away from. Mm-hmm. Because listening, and there's research on this, the two recent researches I found, one is that people that, this is kind of face valid, right? Face validity. They found out, they did research actually, that commission salespeople are bad listeners. Like, that's a shock. 100% commission salespeople are good listeners. But more importantly, responding was so sensing, evaluating, hearing, and then responding and demonstrating understanding, which Reid talks about in some of their research. And this article talks about, that's where it all happens. In my book, what I'm probably most proud of, my biggest contribution to the field, is the idea of summarizing in story. That telling the customer's story back to them. Back 6-7 years ago, I got bombarded with clients who, can you teach us storytelling? Mm-hmm. Again, as if the problem is the salespeople aren't talking good enough.
Right.
Can we be better talkers about us? And I was like mystified, like, that's the problem we're trying to solve? Why don't we solve the problem that we don't understand them and we don't demonstrate understanding? So there's a technique, summary is important. And every now and then we tell this client story back to them. So here's what I understand. 2 years ago, you joined, you were excited, you got involved, and then this issue came up, and now you're wondering, and you're thinking, do I do this or that? And you're probably wondering this too. Do I have that right? And the customers, when you do this, go, holy mackerel, you got it. So we teach, our basic methodology, you want to out understand the competition. Others would say you want to out insight the competition. I think you get insight through understanding, though. And I think people want to be understood.
Well, it's pretty tough to debate that. And in fairness to the guys from the Challenger Sale, I mean, we've had Matt Dixon on the show.
Lovely guy.
And, at some point in time, where there's lots of stuff we like about the Challenger Sale, and we will. Hey, maybe the next time we bring you both.
Because it's things I want to ask him, or I want to accuse him of, or something.
And he's a spectacular, Matt Dixon, a spectacular guy, just like you. So I think it'd be an interesting meeting if the three of us got together. But I will say, I'll jump out and the listening, understanding the customer, so important, John. And the timing's kind of fun because our last guest, I don't know have you done any work, read Oscar Trimboli's work?
No.
Oh, you'll love it. So
I'll write down.
Yeah. Oscar's got a book called Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words. Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words. But it's a very, very powerful small book. But I'll just bring up a couple of very quick points because it really aligns with what you've said. You talked about buyers wanting to be understood. I think we all want to be, it's such a great, his leaders, whoever it is, it's just such great wisdom. But a couple of fun points he brings up in his book is most of us speak at about 125 words per minute, but we think 900 words a minute.
Yeah.
So no matter what I'm saying, there's a lot in here that isn't coming out. And we listen at 400 words a minute. So when you're talking to me, John, you're speaking at 125 words a minute, but my brain's processing at least 400 words a minute. It's really hard for me not to be distracted.
Exactly. It's tough.
Yeah. So it just brings up all these good thoughts. And I think it's so relevant for us in sales. And you call it out as a core selling skill. What the customer is telling us isn't always the whole story. And somehow we've got to pull out what isn't said.
Yes. And it's funny because I've been doing research on listening for a client and I've come up with this concept. I'd love to, I'm going to read that book, but proactive listening. Because if you think, when I did the research, there's, what people are saying and how they're saying it. But at a proactive level, you get involved with mentalizing and why are they saying it? Why are they telling me this? Why are they saying it this way? Which is a much deeper level of trying to get out the meeting. I would say the other thing with listening is just, drilling down and listening for subjective terms. We do a lot on, people talk subjectively. We're looking for a supplier who is going to be, good at on-time delivery. And we write down good on-time delivery. And then we ask the next question. But we should slow down and say, hold on, you said good on-time delivery. What does that look like for you? It's just peeling that extra question that most salespeople fly over and really miss.
Well, you lay it out so nicely in your book. I think this connection in between the discovery and the snow cone versus the snowman, where there's such a big difference where I'm asking you leading questions because I'm waiting for answers where I can spike the ball because you've now said you need exactly what I sell, is so much different.
Yes.
Than if I'm actually asking questions with an authentic curiosity to continue to learn. And by the way, I think you address the core listening there, because if I do that, I'm in the moment in the actual conversation.
Yes.
Instead of going, hey, I'm waiting for him to say red. And when he says red, I'm going to say yellow.
Yeah. I had an early rejection. The patient had an early rejection of, spin and other techniques, expand the pain, all these techniques, feel, felt, found. I understand them, but when they're not authentic, when they're not in the moment, in a conversation, if they're not genuine, I think they become a sales technique that you look like a peddler. You look like Vendorland. And I think it's hard to master those skills and look authentic. So I'd much rather just say to people, hey, you're probably not as curious as you think you are. Or write down 10 questions you would normally ask. Which one of those doesn't have anything to do with you selling something? None of them. Well, they all have to. So that's not genuinely curious. That's kind of partly curious. But wherever you can have the learner, like I just came up with an activity there, right? Where you have the learner write down the questions and then come to the realization and then talk about what's the consequence. Or if I show up and I ask about that guy's tank, which has nothing really with me to doing selling something. I just noticed the tank and it's kind of interesting. And he likes to talk about his tank. Do I deepen the relationship? Do I end up winning the day? I think, yes, I do. I beat you because I'm more curious than you. And of course, I'm listening after I ask the question.
So incredibly important. By the way, this is where I actually think this is the biggest challenge on sales today, particularly for folks entering the profession, because they're so uncertain of everything they want to pitch. And really what they get trained on is products, features, functions, pitching, or identifying one problem. And as soon as somebody identifies the one problem, all right, okay, I'm going to just move them along the process to my next thing. And
but it's funny you should say that, because back in the day when I first started training, I should do this activity again, but I would design it in a way that the participants wouldn't know this. And it was designed to say, hey, you should get the full picture, a full understanding before you talk about yourself so much, but really have the full picture. But I would see how quickly I could get them to talk about themselves. Like if they said, hey, what are you looking for? I go, oh, I'm looking for a global supplier. And a lot of people go, oh, we're a global supplier. They know nothing else about me. They know one thing.
That's it.
And they chased it, right? And now they're talking about them. And they're not finding out about me anymore. And it's just so fascinating the speed at which they give up curiosity, give up listening, and go into tell mode.
We call that in our training, don't spike the ball. Right? You're trying to, I almost think of it, I'm just thinking of this now, so it won't be genius, but you're stepping on the court, you're playing with a friend, you guys are warming up.
Yes.
She's hitting the ball over, you're hitting the ball, and she sets one up and you just spike it, you just slam it and kill the rally. That's not the intent of the warm-up. Save that for the game. But, so don't spike the ball, get the conversation going, because it's never the one thing. The more you understand their world, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, the lesson I learned when I managed the sales team in Canada, because they had a product with a unique name, and they would lead with the product name. And I realized part of sales is objection avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
Why say a name? Well, why talk about your products that can create objections? When they're talking, unless they're psychotic, they're not going to create objections. Multiple person. I mean, unless they have an issue, as long as they're talking, there's probably not objection. The minute we talk, we run the risk of creating objections.
Mm-hmm.
So stay curious, listen, summarize back to them, earn the right to then talk about what you do. But the minute you start talking too early, you can create objections in the customer mind. Objections like, "Will that really work? That sounds expensive. I don't know if that'll fit in. Oh, the other stakeholders may not like this." I mean, think of all the thousands of things that can go through a buyer's head when you start yapping about your product prematurely.
Well, that's where you bring up in the book, I think, is helpful too. Even folks who are good at solving problems, that's one part of selling. Then, by the way, that's more sophisticated than transactional generally.
Yeah.
But the top providers, the top salespeople, they actually identify problems.
Yeah.
But you can't do that in a vacuum. And the person who actually identifies the problems, the buyer, you just help them through an engaged, authentic conversation to understand it or to articulate it.
Sure.
So
sometimes even to just say, "Hey, you didn't mention this as a problem, but normally I see this."
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll go, "You're right, I didn't." And sometimes I had this once happen with a sales rep who, I did that, and the customer said, "Yeah, that's not a problem for me." I'm like, "So why isn't it a problem for you?" Because I usually see it. And the customer gave an answer. I said, "Well, that's good for you." So we left the call, and the sales rep said, "Wow, that was bad." I said, "What was bad?" And they said, "Well, you were wrong." I said, "About what?" They said, "Well, you said this is a problem, but it wasn't." I'm like, "But it usually is."
Mm-hmm.
And I did it in a collegial, collaborative way.
Yeah.
And he now feels better because he doesn't have that problem.
Well, it's an authentic conversation.
It's authentic. I'm in the moment.
Yeah. Here's the beauty of this authentic conversation. I don't know what you're going to say.
Yeah.
So I'm not scripting both sides. So that's why we're engaged and curious and listening and enjoying it. And you can be surprised, and you don't know exactly where it's going to go. I think this is kind of the big change of the last 20 or 30 years, where maybe we thought then that we could walk in and drive the perfect sales conversation and lead them down the garden path. And to a certain extent, it's such a terrible world. We trapped them. Oh, they got nowhere to go. They need us. Guess what? No, they don't. Guess what? There's 4,000 of you, and you all look exactly the same to him or her. So, but I think that's a lot. The difference of thinking we can completely own both sides of this thing. It's just not how this works.
No, and I by the way, I have great respect for challenger selling. I do think their research is right. It's the methodology they train on that I get whissy on. But I love their research because I do think this call's gotten compressed. I do think the classic consultative, let me ask you 8 or 9 or 10 questions, let me listen to that, let me expand the pain, let me do all these things, and then let me tell you how we're going to help you. I think those days have been gone for a while. In fact, I think they've been gone since the 1990s because, I didn't do calls like that back in the day. I was much more agile, much more. If I had an idea, I might bring it up early. I might bring it up later. If they said something that is unique or different, I might go off my questions that I'm asking.
Yeah.
I was there. I remember one famous call I went on where, and this happens a lot, where the C-level senior person who's created the content, created the company, created whatever, thinks that the baby is the answer and believes that, if we talk about ourselves, they're going to buy because look how great we are. And we have chevrons and we have PowerPoints and we've got these decks and marketing and we want the salespeople to use them. I called on a CEO. He walks in the room and he says, let me show you my problem. And he got on the flip chart and wrote his problem, which was mix and margin. He was selling too much of the wrong stuff. He says, can you solve it? I said, yeah, that's what we do. He goes, I go, do you want to know how we would do it? He goes, no, I don't care. I just want to know if you can solve it. And I'm like, yeah, I have like 3 questions. When you want to get started? How many people are we talking about? Well, Accenture comes in after me and there's like 5 of them. And, they come in and he walks in and says, here's my problem. Can you solve it? They say, yes, of course. And they say, we want to tell you how we do it. And he said, I'm not interested. They go, but you must know. So then they bring out their decks. Of course, I want the business. He ends up going through their decks looking for mistakes. And I met him. I won the business. I'm like, what was that about? But the interesting thing, the reason I want to tell the story is I called up my company after the call and I said, I think we're going to get this. And my boss's reaction was, did you go through the PowerPoint? I'm like, no. He goes, well, did you share, our case studies? I'm like, no. And it just, like, there was not a belief system that allowed them to think that you couldn't talk about your capability without winning the sale.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, right? It's a mental model, but it's interesting.
Well, motor memory for your boss back then as well.
Yes.
Coming from this place that said, well, he or she's managing 8 people and I need them all to be doing exactly the same thing.
Right.
That was me in the year 2000 when I took my first sales management job, for sure.
Yep.
Everybody needs to do everything exactly the same way I did it. And when they didn't do that, I didn't like it and they didn't like it. And you'd never seen 9 more miserable people, and I caused all of it.
Oh, God bless you.
So that does lead to this, maybe one of our final questions. Has been so much fun, John, but one of the final questions, these challenges with, you referenced, hey, I called my boss. I phoned my sales leader.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit. We had a great chat, just before we started today about, some of the challenges in sales management today. Very, very tough job to be a sales leader.
Yeah, I think it's a tough job. It's a tough job because you sit in between the C-level or the organization. That depends on the size of the company, but God forbid you're working for the owner who created the stuff, who believes it's easy, who believes anybody can sell it, who claims to be a great salesperson themselves, even though oftentimes they're not, or they only are because of their force of will and the fact that they have the title. But they really don't understand selling, but they think it's anything anybody can do because they really, truly, truly believe the product is such that it should sell itself. Mm-hmm. And of course it doesn't. So you have that pressure from the top, and then you have people that you're managing who may or may not be filling out CRM, may or may not be communicating well, different styles, different personalities. And who knows if you've gotten any training budget or the ability to train them, because that's been cut, or, again, if the owner thinks, well, anybody can do it, why would I train people on it?
Right.
And so it's hard. I think the hardest part is, and I've coached a lot of senior sales leaders and, sales managers, and it always is what I just told you before the call, was this idea of the strategic W, where you start at this top level, but you got to go down and you got to go on calls and you got to see what's happening and you got to understand the CRM and you got to understand the data. But then you have to pull yourself back up, like the W, and then observe what's going on, go back down. But it's this constant going up and down that you need to master. HBR even called it like zooming in and zooming out. Oh. But I need to understand sort of what's going on, but I also need to rise above it to think more strategically about things like, I was one of the first persons I coached. He's a very senior leader now. But the first time I met him, I said, you need to think more strategically. And he said, you're right. And it dawned on me, because I said, do you know what that means? And he goes, no, I have no idea. To his credit. And I said, well, you should be thinking about, territory assignments, account selection, customer segmentation. What's my pricing model? Do I need inside sales? Is the comp plan driving the right behavior? I mean, there's a universe of stuff at your level you should be pondering, or at least, getting smart about. And that's my advice to sales. I think that's sales managers need to value thinking time. They need to fall 11 less with doing. There's a couple traps. I'll do real quickly. There's, the firefighter trap, where they come to me with your fires and I'll put them out. There's the exclusion trap, where I'll make the exception maker trap. You don't have the power, but I'll come in and I'll make the exception in front of the client. So there's all kinds of traps that you can easily fall in if you're a sales manager and you're not conscious about these traps and you're not valuing being strategic enough.
Feels like, it's a bit of the forest and the trees, which is the same challenge that, salespeople get caught in when they're working deals. They can't see the forest for the trees, understandably so. And then they battle things that you bring up, like common optimism bias and everything else.
All that stuff.
Whereas a third set of eyes is very helpful. The challenge for sales leaders is they don't have that third set of eyes sometimes. So being in the forest and then taking a step back.
Yes.
That's why I love the analogy of the W is fantastic.
And the pipeline conversations. I mean, I sat on, you probably sat on, poor sales managers, like,
Yeah.
get the team on the phone. What's going on with this opportunity? What's going on with that? It's just death. It's just death. Everybody, rather than really looking at that opportunity with fresh eyes and asking good questions, really get the assessment right. Is it real? Can we win it? And is it worth it? And how are we going to get this to green? What are the tactics we're going to do? But they haven't been trained in it. They don't know it. They haven't seen it modeled. And so they're working hard. But the question is, are they doing the right stuff?
I also like that about the book, John. I thought the RWW is a very, very good, simple way of qualifying deals for anybody listening today. Is it real? So is it a qualified deal? Can we win it? So why would we win this thing? Can we win it? And then finally, is it worth it to win it? And so we're always big on territory planning and being strategic. Start with that ideal customer profile. Do I actually want this deal? Or am I chasing this thing because it came to me, or, walked in the front door, or, hey, we think it's a foot in door to a longer term opportunity, but you know how those things kind of go. We often, as a sales training company, we're in Canada, we get called out by big banks and they'll come in. I don't like those sales cycles. Those sales cycles last forever. And by the way, I need an abacus to figure out who's involved in making a decision in a big Canadian bank, right? Oligopoly.
Sure.
There's 32 people who influence this thing. It's not for us. That sales cycle is 18 months long. And at the end of the day, it's going to go to formal RFP. No, thank you.
Right. Yeah. So, and that takes, I haven't said this in a long time, but you never feel better about yourself than when you win a deal or you walk away from a deal.
Right.
Those are the two moments where you have integrity and you feel successful, because I'm not going to chase every deal. Not every piece of business is for me, and I'm making that choice, not the customer. Of course,
right.
winning, and that's always fun. But I think walking away, people don't, unless you've done it, you don't realize how great it is to say, we're not going to do that.
Hard to do though, right? That discipline because of the optimism bias.
Yes.
Oh,
and
we could.
Yeah, we could do this, we could do that. So we're all great storytellers. So we can tell our story, how we're going to get this, even though
you're right.
Yeah. We can make
also, I want my funnel to look that much bigger.
Yes.
The funnel, which contains the most blatant lies in the world. If you want to be lied to, sit in a forecasting meeting. Hey, John, just great to meet you here today. What a pleasure. What a pleasure chatting. I have a feeling it's a Friday when we're recording this. You and I would happily be here 3 hours later.
Oh, I can keep talking about this stuff. I love this stuff.
Me too. The people who are listening today, how would they learn more, connect in with you if they wanted to learn more about the JMReid Group? Yeah,
we have a website, of course, www.jmreidgroup.com. My name's John Reid. You can always email me. I'm John at JMReid Group. We do have the book Models to Mindsets, which is available on Amazon, which is a good read, as you said, very conversational. It kind of sounds like this probably. Yep. And we've just written a new book, which they might find value in, called the Five Lost Superpowers, why we lose them and how to get them back. This is the idea that as children, we have some great superpowers that we tend to get driven out of us through life, but they're of huge value, like curiosity, like authenticity, like some of the things we've talked about. So that's the latest book we have out there.
Well, listen, I hope you'll come back and join us on the show so we can talk about that book.
Yes, let's do that. I love this.
Let's book that in. And team, moving from models to mindsets, rethinking the sales conversation. Pick up that book. You will be pleased you did pick up that book. And thank you all for listening today. If you enjoyed today's podcast, let us know. Please leave a rating for us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to it. And if there's anything we can do to improve these podcasts, specifically me, please let me know. Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. Thanks again, John.
Thank you, Mark.